episode 124, PR Essentials Summit, Building Thought Leadership and Your Personal Brand with Jasmine Stanley. Hey there, we are back. Today, we're talking about building thought leadership and your personal brand. And executive thought leadership has become a topic of interest, since the pandemic hit, because it's more and more important for people to not only know that the brand that they love and they trust is really good, but also the executives that play a role in there. So we're going to talk a little bit about thought leadership and what that means and how to achieve it. And in this summit session, I have my colleague and expert, Jasmine Stanley. So she kind of shed some light on what you can do to create content, what you should think about when you're creating content. And this is really more from a personal brand perspective. So even if you are a CEO of a company or a founder of a startup or a marketing executive, a part of a team, branding yourself also helps the overall brand of the company. I can't tell you how many times where we've gone into companies and they appoint someone new as an executive leader, and because no one's ever seen anything about them before, it's not very newsworthy. So Jasmine and I kind of dive into this whole idea of thought leadership and how important it is. So enjoy.
Welcome to the PR Playbook Podcast, the only podcast giving you actionable skills and advice you need to execute a strategic PR program. Warning: what you hear next may lead to brand awareness and increased sales and customer exposure. Now here's your host, Ranjini Joshua.
Hi, this is Ranjini Joshua. I am back. Jasmine Stanley is back. We are here for it, guys. Thought leadership, building thought leadership and your personal brand in 2023. I think it's probably a more important topic than it's ever been before. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Jasmine?
Definitely, especially now with everybody creating so much content. Thought leadership is at the forefront of that type of content, especially when you're looking to make an impact and, sharing your key messages and your opinions.
So today's obviously theme is workshops and DIY. So we're going to kind of guide you through thought leadership, what that means, what you should be thinking about, considering, and kind of the best practices of thought leadership so that you can really position yourself in the coming year. Now is the time to do it. Once you get into 2023, everything goes crazy. So let's get started here. I'm going to let you take this. What is thought leadership and personal branding? We just discussed that they're kind of a little bit different. And why are they important?
So thought leadership and personal branding, there's a misconception that they're kind of synonymous, but there are a few differences that are important to note when you're developing thought leadership or when you're thinking about, developing your personal brand. So when I think about thought leadership, I think about subject matter experts. That's the biggest keywords that we want to think about when you're creating content for this. You have to be knowledgeable. You have to have an opinion, those type of things. You have to be able to stand on your opinion, right? Like we live in an age where everyone wants to agree. Everyone wants to be, but it's okay in thought leadership to kind of say, this is why I feel this way about it. And then on top of that, you need to have it research backed. So whenever you're thinking about thought leadership, sharing trends, especially your experience, those are all things that make good thought leadership. As far as personal branding, I want to say the biggest thing is you want to connect with your audience on the more emotional level, right? So instead of just sharing industry expertise, you're kind of, showing your authentic self. It supports, again, thought leadership because people are following you for your thought leadership based on the type of personality that you're kind of bringing to the table. They want to see, you're aligning your intent with your action when it comes to personal branding and really showing them how you are valuable and making an impact. So I would say those are the main things when it comes to thought leadership and why they're important and kind of just the ways to leverage them.
Yeah, and I think what you said was important too to remember. Thought leadership is subject matter expertise, right? It's like the area that you are the expert at, that you want to like really amplify your voice. You want to position yourself as someone who's like thinking ahead of other people in that area. When personal branding, personal branding is like actually almost, it's a compliment, right? To thought leadership. It's like personal branding is not only your professional brand, which I think is thought leadership a little bit more, but personal branding could be, how you have a family, or it could be like you are a swimmer or a triathlete or something like that. So personal branding brings all the different elements of your life together as a person. And then thought leadership, I think, really just takes those expert areas that you really know about and digs in, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yep. More emotional, one's more, cognitive and one's more emotional, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. Agree totally. And yeah, it just gives you a whole look at a person. Thought leadership also, sorry, going back to that, thought leadership can also be represented by brands. It doesn't have to be a person. So I think that's also another different. Personal branding is typically a person. Thought leadership can be thought leadership for a person, but also like a brand as a company. So that's another thing to really think about.
And to piggyback off of what you were saying, we shared this fact about how thought leadership is really leading content marketing. But to Ranjini's point, when you're doing thought leadership, like some of the types of thought leadership that would show like the brand and the organization would be literally industry thought leadership. So including perspectives of news and trends, organizational thought leadership, which would be more about talking about the vision and your mission of your organization and what you guys are doing, how it's helping your industry, how you guys are solving problems, how, the real big thing these days is work culture, right? So one of those type of thought leadership is saying, how are we, leveraging our employees and everybody's doing their work and getting things done, but also keeping in mind that we're people, we have families, we have dogs, we have things, outside of work, but also just making sure that we're kind of hitting those results. And then, product thought leadership. So why is my product and our organization's product or service different in the industry? What are we doing? How is it helping? Those type of things. Just being a solution for your customers and your clients.
Yeah, I think, having this holistic approach has now become a little bit more commonplace. So I think it's really important for everyone to keep that in mind. And we keep saying authentic. One, I hate that word authentic, but also it's the only word you can really use.
Right.
So I've been using it too. But it's everybody's so now gravitating towards personalities, and I think trust is a problem. And so that's why authenticity is a thing that people don't trust people anymore. So feeling like you are the person that you say you are, or you are the brand that you say you are, that's really important. So it's good to remember that as we kind of go through this work.
And there's a saying for a reason. And the saying is people do business with people that they know. So the more that they know about you, whether it's not just, pushing products, the more that they'll be able to connect with you and the more they'll believe, this is the company I want to work with. This is the product that I support. I'm going to buy this because again, they know you, you've shared information and let them in on certain things that really help them to say okay, this is truthful. A lot of times when it comes to selling, they have this whole mentality of a dirty salesperson. When you go to the car dealership and you're going to get a new car and they just want to sell. And it's like a lemon, but they sound so good. They look so clean cut. People are over that now. They want the real thing, the good and the bad too. Honestly,
Right.
Everything that's going on, not just.
They just transparency is a big thing, right?
Definitely.
So we just finished our panel on content marketing. So you guys got an earful of that. But right now we're going to hone in on this particular thought leadership. And according to SEMrush, 65% of businesses already include thought leadership in their marketing. I think some people probably know they do, and some people probably don't. So let's dive into that a little bit.
The one that they will, if they haven't done it already, they will be doing it this year. So now this panel is really helpful to kind of get your foot in the door, get you guys started to know what you have to focus on specifically.
Yeah, I think 2023, I'm just, every conversation we've had is going back to content, and going back to content is king, and creating content, leveraging content. So I think now, I kind of knew that before, but having all these panels over the past couple of days, you kind of realize, yes, this is a theme that's coming through, not just with me, not just with the Silver Telegram, but with everyone we're talking to. It's all about that. And I think it's going to be important to be able to really leverage thought leadership in lots of different ways. So this is kind of first, all the different types of ways you can leverage thought leadership. Jasmine, do you want to dive into these a little bit?
Sure. So one of the biggest types of thought leadership.
We can let's go over the types and then we'll dive into them a little bit.
Yeah. So byline articles. So for those who don't know, byline articles are basically where you have a subject matter expert and they're kind of, again, offering perspective, offering industry advice, offering experience. Really, that's what you really want to come across in your byline articles so you can connect with your audience. Because They're looking at seeing, what has this person done? How are they staying ahead of the curve? And they're taking that knowledge. So that's the most important thing to keep in mind when you're doing byline articles. And then also your experience in speaking. So a lot of clients that we've worked with in the last year are like, what about speaking? What kind of speaking engagements, doing a lot of conferences, especially now that COVID is over. And a lot of conferences are either, virtual, hybrid, in person now. And we're kind of getting back in the groove of that. They want to get out and start speaking more, those who are comfortable with doing so. And then industry columns, those are always good. I mean, there's certain people that read certain publications for industry columns. They want to hear exactly what's going on in this particular industry that they're, in and involved to stay ahead of the curve. So that's a really good piece of thought leadership that you can kind of say, okay, on a specific topic, on a specific publication, this is what I'd like to share and what you guys should know. Podcast interviews. I mean, who does not have a podcast? Everyone has a podcast except me.
Do you have a podcast?
Me, because everyone has it. I have to do the other things. I'm so interested in the other types of content. I can't do the podcast. And then obviously media, typical traditional media coverage and articles, media pitching traditionally. So.
All right. Thank you. She did a really good overview. I don't have to say any more there. So I'm going to focus on this one, just getting started before we dive into these different types and how to really make those work for you. I think one of the things that we found, this is, I think, more so because we started doing podcasts in 2022 more. People wanted to be more featured on podcasts. We created these expert profiles. And so what this includes is really like an overview of who you are, a bio. Like this is something you should prepare in advance to pitching any of these things. So create a profile. I always say, I gave you some example of headshots. But I think it's good to have at least 2 to 3 because you don't want to use the same headshot in everything. It's nice to have like that standard, like the first one, right? The standard headshot where you're with a business background. But then it's nice to have something maybe, I say don't go too crazy, right? Like don't go too earthy or like I found a headshot the other day. Someone sent it to me and they're like making this crazy face. And it was a fun headshot, but it was like too fun. So if you're doing this for business, I would say you could put yourself in really cool lifestyle settings, like do it outside, like this last headshot here, have an interesting background. I would say keep other people out of it always. So make sure you have like a standard headshot and something with a little bit of personality. Maybe it's a different hairdo. Maybe if it's a different wardrobe, maybe it's a location. On location, you're like, looking at a sunset. I don't know. But you can do maybe some varied headshots because the different headshots are going to be good for different things. And also, a lot of times, especially with events, I found that I try to match my headshot to that particular event and like their style. And so it's good to have like an array of headshots to do that. And I even have, I think you've probably seen this, Jasmine. I even have like the caricature of myself, which is like a cartoon. So I use things for all different reasons. So get a headshot. Please invest in a headshot. There's things online that can do it real quickly. There's a service called Soona, Soona, and they can do it. And it's really easy. It's digital, all that kind of stuff.
And you can use your iPhone. I mean, everyone has an iPhone, right? So iPhone, MacBook, and set it up yourself, get a ring light to make sure you have good lighting. That's a really important thing too, I would say, about having a headshot. You don't want it to be too dark in the background, too dark on your face. You want to, have all of those features present. But again, you can do this easily at home or have someone take a picture of you.
Absolutely. Yeah, but do you know how hard it's been to get clients to even do that? It's really funny because when you bring up the idea of a headshot, they're like, oh, well, I'm going to get it done. And then they never get it done. And then you don't get a headshot.
Right. That's old school, having a whole, photography team out, makeup and hair and everything like that. You literally do not have to do that right now. Like,
actually, another thing I would suggest, almost every event that I've been to in the last year has somebody's booth has a headshot thing set up. So get the headshot, get that free headshot at someone's booth, line up for it. I remember on one show, I think it was like AUVSI, when we went to that show. Maybe I didn't go to that show. Maybe it was maybe it was NRF, but I was at that show last year and someone had a headshot station set up and it was a free headshot. And I didn't do it the first day because I didn't realize that they had it. But the next day I did my hair and all that kind of stuff. And I got an awesome headshot and all for free. So there are those things. Like if you're going to an event, there's probably some kind of headshot set up. I know at CES too, which is coming up here. They have one too in the Eureka Park, which is in the Venetian Hotel. somebody always has a headshot thing. So just keep an eye out for those opportunities. Never say no, what I say. So identifying your personal vision, how do you want to be associated? How do you want people to see you? I think that's really, really important. And so you add this to your profile. Make sure you have like your area of expertise, not only that, but like what you're willing to talk about. And I know in that last panel, you guys were doing the speaker training. Also, what you're not willing to talk about. I thought that was a really good point that Carrie brought up.
Yeah. And then having a response for that.
Yes, absolutely. Having a response for the things that you don't want to say. But anyways, yes, when you're creating the profile, identify your personal vision. How do you want people to see you? What kind of expert are you? What are the areas that you're championing? All that kind of stuff. And then, of course, listing your speaking experience. So previous interviews, it could be written, it could be podcasts, it could be webinars. Like I have things on YouTube that I found that I forgot that were there or didn't know that existed, like somebody else posted it. But anytime you do a panel, get the links. Just have, even if you set up like a link tree or if you just have a document with all the links in there, have them, because typically when you submit a speaker submission, they're going to ask you, what are the last 3 places you spoke at? So you're going to have the date, the topic of what you said, and then maybe the link to that presentation. The other thing I would say, podcasts, have a link to those. I would always line it up, like try to be as organized as possible. The date, the topic, and then the link to that thing, and anything. It could be like something like this. I mean, we're going to add this to our speaking profile. I'm going to. I don't know about you, Jasmine, but yeah.
Because that's how you get people to reach out to you from these expert profiles. So then after a while, instead of you submitting, people will be able to find your information online. If you have all of it in one area, they can say, oh, this person is perfect for this. So,
and typically they just want to like validate the fact that you can talk to an audience. Like, are you going to look good? And are you going to sound good? Right?
Exactly. And do you know what we're talking about?
Right. All right, let's dive into byline articles. Jasmine is a pro at byline, so I'm going to let her take this.
So byline articles they're one of the more common, I would say, articles and type of content these days, but they're the most wanted. So one of the things that we spoke about with some of our journalists from our other panel is the type of content that they're looking for. So as we know, right, I wouldn't say that journalism is per se dying, but I would definitely say, like, we know these magazines and their staff are getting smaller and smaller. They don't have a lot of the resources to write a lot of their original content. And so this is the perfect opportunity to get your content out there, to get your key messages out there through targeted audiences, which would be these magazines, trade publications, whatever, through contributed content. So I think the most important thing to think about when you're writing byline or contributed content is you do not want to be overly promotional. You are not here to sell per se. You are here to provide information. So think of byline and contributed content as, I'm sharing my expertise. I'm sharing my experience. In there, you can kind of weave in messages that would say, why you are the perfect solution if somebody has gone through something that you're dealing with or you're talking about in your content. But
it's like the brainwashing. It's like you're doing like undertones of that messaging, right? Like without overly promoting it, you're kind of giving people, what is it called? Subliminal messages.
Exactly, which is a big thing in advertising and marketing. If you guys know back in the day, that's the thing that the whole, you need to see a message 7 times before a person takes it in. It's kind of that same concept, but for contributed content, I'll tell you right now, if you're pitching an editor and you have some content that's too overly promotional, they will not run it. That'll be the first thing they say. Like, we want expert insight. We want, we don't want your company name all through and out, the article. And honestly, the best contributed content that I've seen that works is like where you're literally providing like a problem in the industry, right? And a solution on the industry. In that solution part, you can kind of mix in how you were able to solve that issue or how your company was able to solve that issue. But again, you don't want it to be overtly, hey, pick me, it's us. We're great at this. This is what we do. We're selling, sell. That is not the purpose of byline and contributed content. And then also, when you're writing byline and contributed content, keep in mind to do a mix, right? Like, not everything needs to be long form, right? And this is the research on the publication comes into hand, because if you're submitting something that's 1,500 words and then on their website and their content, they're only doing, 500 word articles, 800 word articles, they're not going to run your stuff, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's definitely I think it really depends on the frequency of how they run byline. So I feel like trade publications usually do like about 800 words. And then larger publications, like we just did something with VentureBeat, and that was, I think, 2,000 words. So, but it was in-depth, more technical type style articles. So you just, you have to, you can Google contributed guideline, right? Like writing guidelines, I think, and that will pop up. Yeah.
Yep. On each site, they always write in there if they accept content. So that's another thing too. Before you submit contributed content to a publication, please do your research and see if they even accept it, right? Because, and if they don't, maybe reach out to them and say, what kind of, pieces or information could I send you that you guys might be interested in? Maybe you'll be able to get something where you can create a little bit of content they can use, and then they'll take that and make a bigger story, but you're still getting your end result, which is coverage, right?
Yeah. And if they don't say like explicitly, if they take contributed content, the person to write to is the editor-in-chief, and you can just email them. Usually their information's on the contact page or in the editorial masthead. And you can literally just say, hey, I'd like to submit a piece of content on this. And I always like, it's like almost like you're pre-pitching what you're going to write, because then you can kind of get a sense of if they like it or not. So I want to submit a content article on this. Are you taking bylines? And can you share your editorial guidelines? That shows them that you're being mindful of their guidelines and their format. And so I think they become a little bit more open. And that's kind of how I opened the door a few times. Even though I knew they took contributed articles, I still did that email just to like get the conversation started.
Like, hey, I'm going to send you something. That's another thing too. Because like a lot of times, depending on who the editor is, they want that. Like they don't want you to just send them run my article, please. It's so interesting to your audience. Like they want a little bit of an introduction, right? To kind of build that rapport, which works for you later, because I know I've done that, submitted content, they've run it, and then they've come back to me and say, hey, I love that article you did on this. This is what we have coming up. Guys, have anything that you could submit to this? If we don't, now we'll come up with something, because you're bringing an opportunity to me versus me pitching you. And I'd also like to add to that, when you're submitting bylines and contributed articles, always include a headshot of the writer in their bio, because they're going to ask you that. They need that information. I know some of the trades might run it like it's a piece from, their editorial staff, but always make sure that you at least provide that information and let them kind of choose if they're going to use it or not, because it's vital information. And in the bio, that's a good opportunity to put your company name. So your company name, your social media profiles, that's your CTAs come to action there. Like follow us for more content. All of that can be included in the bio with the contributed content.
That's a good point. I like that. I think another big question that people wonder about is publishing time. And that's, varies with everyone. I will tell you, and I'm calling out VentureBeat just because we just recently worked with them. We submitted to VentureBeat. It took them 2 months to publish our content. You submit to IT Pro Portal, it'll take them 2-3 weeks. So it's really how big is the publication? How many people are submitting? Remember, you're not the only person out there. So it can vary. And I do check in with the editor, but like I try not to bother them too much, right? Like it's like you're doing a fine line between like pestering and just asking. And I think what I've done is like, if they don't respond in a week, I'll just say it again and be like, hey, do you have an idea of when the article will come out? Sometimes they'll give you a date. Great. Awesome. Sometimes they'll be like, well, our queue is backed up. I'll let you know when it's scheduled. So that's another thing you might get from editors. They might have to say, oh, I'll come back to you. And in that case, do not be afraid to follow up, maybe in a couple weeks, because they're going to forget about you. To be honest, there's just so many people submitting content, submitting things. They're not doing it intentionally. They just have a lot on their plate. And also, through this whole summit, I've been saying like, we're all humans. Like, let's remember that we're all humans and we have other stuff come up. We get sick, kids get sick, we go on vacation, we have babies, we all this kind of stuff. So it's just, don't feel afraid to follow up unless they say like, hey, look, going to publish this day, leave me alone,
Right. And honestly, if they feel like that, they will tell you.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that in the very first follow-up. Like, here, this is the idea. This is what we're doing. I'll talk to you then.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I'm going to just address who takes them. I know we talked about it a little bit, but almost every publication, not every, what would you say? Like 70% of publications take contributed content?
I'll say 70% of publications take contributed content, maybe 75. And I'd say about 60 to 65% of them want it to be exclusive content. So keep that in mind. do. Some publications, they don't mind because they have such a quick news cycle where they're publishing 10 to 15 articles a day. They don't mind, having content that might be somewhere else as long as it's not a competitor. But most of them want, exclusive content too. So
Yeah, and that doesn't mean you can't use it again. It just means you have to like pretty much repurpose it 80%. So you can use the same concept and ideas, but you have to kind of like rewrite it, reformat it into like a little bit of a different version of itself. If you want to resubmit it, we've done that too. But Jasmine, you have a lot of success in placing the same content in multiple outlets too.
I do. And I won't take all the credit for myself. I'll probably say it's literally, I've been very thankful and lucky that a lot of these are like, we're publishing so much content that we just need to put content on the site, on social media, on this. And so they're willing to take the content. But again, to your point, repurposing the content, even when it's a publication that may take content that's not exclusive, it's always good to kind of change the headline, change the subline. Maybe if you have quotes from somebody's, if you've done an interview, take those quotes that ran in one publication and put some new quotes in, just kind of finding ways to make it just exclusive to that publication, if that makes sense.
Agreed. And then what you should submit, I think we kind of covered that a little bit, but really anything that you're an expert at.
Yeah.
And then if you do have subliminal messages, is if there's an agenda that you have, if there's a theme or a campaign that you're running, promote that in a way that's not, again, promotional. You can just talk about the industry challenges is really the best way to go, is addressing industry challenges, because that's what they're going to be interested in publishing anyway. They're going to want to know that it's whatever you're talking about is something that people are thinking about. So that's something to keep in mind when you're creating that headline. I will also say that sometimes they change the headline. So your editorial department, once you submit the article, that's it. You don't really have a lot of control. You have control because you created the content, but they have the ability to change the headline, they edit. So if it appears different than when you submitted it, that is not unusual.
Happened to me before, actually. So I guess we had one too many client mentions. They took them all out. I was like, oh, well, luckily,
They still published.
The bio worked. So the name of the company was in the bio. So I wasn't too upset because when you Google it,
it still comes up. Yeah.
It comes up. So that was a good thing. But yeah, keeping that in mind. And then it's kind of, you got to go back to the client, explain that to them. But, again, that little hack with, including social media or whatever also works too.
All right. Speaking is such a tough one, because I was talking to someone, I forget which panel it was, but we were just talking about how so many speaking opportunities are now paid, and it's just very difficult. That doesn't mean they're all paid, but yeah, I think finding the right industry audience is first and foremost very important when you're talking about submitting speaking opportunities. So sometimes I've submitted some speaking opportunities and they come back and they're like, "Oh, this is great. Can you pay us $5,000?" So that might happen to you. And so I think it's just the way of the world. A lot of things are happening that way. Media opportunities, podcasts, like everybody is like trying to get paid because the industry is like shifting, and social media has really changed the dynamic of the quality and value of content. And so I think it's really important to really make sure that whatever conference you're submitting for, there's a few conferences that are still earned, which is basically that you don't have to pay for. It's earned based on your credibility and your expert profile and what you've done in the past. And then there's a bunch of paid. And I'm not saying the paid ones aren't valid. Just remember, if you're paying for a conference, that target audience is exactly who you want them to be, because you are probably paying through the nose, like, $10K plus, right?
Yeah, just there you're paying because they've curated, guests and attendees for this specific topic, for this specific conference. So, your message will be amplified in that way. So,
yeah. The other thing is, we just had a customer case set, or maybe we're having that soon. Anyway, I'm getting confused with all these panels. So the other thing is, if you want to have a better chance at speaking at an earned event, let's say South by Southwest, I'm just going to throw that one out there. Put together a panel of really cool people, customers, partners, collaborators. There's nothing that can stop you from putting together a panel and saying, "Hey, I'm going to present this panel," and they're going to speak. Who doesn't want to speak at South by Southwest? Everybody does. So, I think that's another great way to kind of work around the quantity of people that are speaking these days, is by adding value by adding an interesting customer, client, collaborator. CES is another one where you can like submit a panel. I think it's, unless you are like Elon Musk or like, I don't know, anybody who like everyone's paying attention to at this point, it's going to be very hard to get, or an industry leader of your particular vertical. It's going to be really hard to get these like standalone speaking opportunities where you're just by yourself talking. This is not like TED. It's not a TED Talk. So I would say, submit a panel when you can, because I think that really helps increase your chances and shows the person that like, oh, this person's not just going to talk about themselves the whole time. They're going to talk about like a case study, or they're going to talk about a challenge and they're going to answer that challenge. So it just brings dynamics. Analysts are great to ask to speak with you. Media is a really good one. It's hard, but media is a good one. And then, like I said, like customers or partners. And then the last thing on speaking and creating your speaking submission, read the agenda. I think people are so stuck to like what they want to talk about. Talk about what you want to talk about, but you could like change the subject a little bit to make it cater to the agenda. Make sure it's targeting the audience. I would say when you're doing a speaking submission, make sure that you reiterate that it's targeting the audience of the conference, because the people who select it, the selection committee, wants to see that the audience is going to be interested. And then also like try to cater a little bit to the theme. Every conference has a theme for the year. And so make sure that you're catering to that theme so that you get that extra little tiny bit of, competitive advantage. Because otherwise, again, you're up against hundreds of people that are submitting, especially if it's earned, more difficult. So make sure you're like providing all the compelling information to make you the right choice,
Yeah, because for the conferences, when they're looking for speakers, like they want a nice variety of speakers. Like a lot of times, again, we're so caught on what we want to talk about, but like really before you do your submission, think like, do I want to be inspirational? Am I trying to be educational? Do I want to be research driven? Do I want to be, controversial? Like when you figure that out, that'll really help pinpoint and again, like you said, create more of a competitive advantage for the other speakers, right? Because they don't want an entire conference that's all inspirational, right? The point of this is to get the conversations going among the attendees. And so just keep that in mind when you're thinking about different speaking opportunities, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, industry columns. That's all you, girl.
Okay, so industry columns. So the most important thing, again, I feel like with every single piece of content, we will hammer this home. Every single thing that we talk about is you have to make sure you are speaking to the right industry audience. That is the biggest thing. Okay. And as you know, at PR, when we're talking about doing content, we have different messages, right? Like for different audiences. So keep that in mind. Again, I know, you might be really pushing a certain initiative or campaign, but for all your content, it doesn't necessarily have to be that, right? Like you could pick your content, industry columns, speaking opportunities based on specific kind of key messages to make sure that you're kind of getting like all of your audience. Like here, I'm being inspirational here. This is, a science conference. So I'm talking about research that we've done and how it's helped the industry. Like really, again, industry columns is no different than any other type of, contributed content or thought leadership. And then also too, like sometimes industry columns will be specifically about one thing. Like one of our clients, it was, it could be all about growing and cultivating. And so every article will have to be about that. Or some industry columns could all just be about, just talking about and commentary on, research and industry trends or whatever's going on. So just kind of figure out a list of topics that you want to discuss. And then from that point, go on and see, okay, what media outlet is going to be that I can use this and that they'll be interested in, their audience will be interested in this messaging. And then you can go from there. And then of course, create a good byline, create a good headline. Some of these, if you're just, a casual, I would say contributor, then you can you have some lateral in that. But if it's something where you're really trying to be like, every month come to this publication and I'll have an article, then you want to create like a nice, cute little like byline or headline. When I think about this, I think about Carrie, in Sex and the City, right? She had her column every week, right? About the Sex and the City and, the different things that were going on with her friends and her family. And readers read it because they were following a particular story, right? Like she had it was themed, but she was bringing in so many different elements. So keep that in mind too. And that'll be also interesting, not just for the readers, but for the editors that you're pitching. And then also last thing would be to draft at least 2 to 3 articles before starting. Again, options, 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 right? If one publication that you might be interested in isn't, taking any contributed content, or they don't have any industry columns or opportunities, you can pitch different articles around. Like maybe you might not get in an industry column, maybe they want to use that content for something else. But again, the end goal is that you're getting the results of the coverage.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think the other thing was, maybe I was thinking a little bit too on, remember when you secured like the ongoing series? I think that's another thing. I would love to maybe include that in this conversation of like how to do that.
So the way that worked was really relationships. Again, I hate to tell my little secrets, but I also like to share my little secrets too. Because I don't know if the little secrets will work for everybody, right? I can kind of tell you how I did it, but the way that I was able to secure that was I really, again, created value as a PR person and professional. When you're working with the media, to Ranjini's point earlier, they get so much content. They get so many people reaching out to them. Some of it is relevant, some of it isn't. But you really have to create a place where like you're a resource, right? Where they want to come to you. And that's kind of how it worked. Like we shared some interesting industry information for them in one article we wrote. And then they said, hey, you know what? We really like the way that you guys wrote that article. This is some things that we have coming up. Do you guys have any input or insight? Would you like to create an article? And I was like, 3 of these 5 things are right in our wheelhouse. We'll go ahead and take these. We'll bring in different people. And then from there, I was able to say like, okay, we're going to get, somebody from our advisory board to byline this article. We're going to get somebody from, the research side, R&D to do this. And then kind of just built the content around that. But that came about specifically from nurturing relationships. I think the PR people were always in that, getting the information out. We're working on this campaign. We have this messaging. And then you have to keep in mind that in between that, when you're not really specifically
when
pitching,
you're not busy.
Right. In between that, when you're not busy and you're pitching them this specific thing, to also check in with them. Hey, how are you guys doing? What are you guys working on now? Like establishing those relationships is the key to having all of these different opportunities, right? Like checking in them as a person, checking in them on as content, checking in on them as conferences. Like from that opportunity that we did, they came to us and say, hey, we have this conference coming up. Do you have anybody that you want to speak? And it's just like,
yes,
I do. I have, well, who would you like? How would you like this? So really in mind and it has to be give and take, right? Give and take. Right. They're giving you something, they're taking something from them, vice versa. A lot of times, journalists feel like PR people just take, write about me, do me. It's like all centered on us, but you have to kind of, include them in it too and really, work on it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. I like that. Okay. Is this the last one on the thing? Because we have a limited, we're coming up and I know this conversation can get long. No. Yeah. Is this the last one?
I think it might be.
Okay. I think so too.
No,
podcast.
Yes, I think so.
Podcasts and media interviews. Okay. So first of all, do your research. I think when you're trying to position yourself as a thought leader, a lot of times you, again, get caught up in the fact that you're pushing your agenda. But I think another important thing to do is also check out the person that you're talking to. Make sure that person isn't like an antagonistic person, or you don't have to make sure they're not, but like you have to know if they are, I guess, is the real thing, right? You want to know if they're going to ask you tough questions, or if this is a softball interview, or if they're going to send you questions in advance and they're just going to ask exactly what they've sent. Some people do that. And so I think it's really, really important to either get your PR team to do it or for you to do it yourself. We do this briefing sheet situation where we do the media research beforehand, or the research on the outlet, or the research on the podcast and what their kind of MO is. And then we kind of try to understand that and display like, okay, I'm talking to this audience and they're expecting this kind of content. And so then you take your topic, your level of expertise, and say, okay, this is how I'm going to convey my expertise for this particular reason, right? Like, I think it's really, really important to do your research. And obviously, when you have a PR team, that is the benefit of that, right? But if you don't have a PR team, make sure not only are you researching the outlet, but also that particular reporter. I just kissed the mic. I have gotten into a situation where they're like an antagonistic situation has started. I'm sure, Jasmine, like, I can't believe that you haven't probably gotten to that situation where they're asking questions and you're like, oh no, right? You're like, oh gosh, how are they going to answer this? Like, we didn't talk about this. And so the point of your previous panel about speaking, it is okay to say you're not comfortable answering something. It's okay to decline answering a question. It just doesn't look very good. So if you have a prepared answer, or if you kind of already know how this person is, then you can navigate around and sidestep around those situations, right?
Which is super important. I try as best as possible to Ranjani's point, when we do our briefing sheets, to really put like, I won't call it crisis because there's not necessarily a crisis, but any hard, or sensitive topics, like you have to, like, your best way as much as possible, try to prepare for those questions. An example I use is like, say for instance, a client, I'm working with, they might have recently had some, layoffs. The interviewer might not necessarily know about that, but we do. And so in that, we have to put in the briefing sheet, okay, if they ask anything about work culture or layoffs or anything like that, this is how you should respond.
Or you shouldn't be talking about how you're growing as a company when you just laid people off.
Exactly.
Don't assume that I think this is a great point. Don't assume that the reporter is not going to Google you or your company before the interview. Like, what if you're a journalist and you don't actually look up that person beforehand? You're not a very good journalist. And so I think, I can say that without any hesitation, right? Like, if you think that person's not going to Google you or find out something about you beforehand, you are just misguided completely, right? The other thing was also try to keep abreast of what's happened in the news, because we have a client that worked with a big fashion house that it shall not be named. And we avoid talking about that particular project. Now, that project was a long time ago, before this whole thing came out, their scandal came out, but just don't mention them. Like, why mention them? Because it's not going to put you in a good light. It's going to be like, oh, they work with these people, so now I'm not going to work with them. So just be aware of those kinds of little nuances that are happening in the news. I don't remember when that whole like Kendall Jenner like Pepsi thing happened. Like, don't say like anything racially insensitive and then talk about the Kendall Jenner Pepsi campaign, because obviously that was a whole debacle. Or, there's so many other, I remember that there was, I think it was like, I want to say Revlon and like some kind of breast cancer awareness thing. There was like a huge thing around that, like maybe in early mid 2000s or something like that. I mean, there's all these different issues that kind of come up. So you do have to stay abreast of some of the trends. Again, this will go into your research portion of looking at the background of this reporter, what they've been writing about, what they're following, right? You might even want to check their Twitter to see what they're tweeting about. I don't know.
Exactly. Because, if they're bad mouthing something that might, to our next point, you might be your key talking point, you do not want that key talking point, because it will turn the entire interview into you and them combative about that key talking point. So see what they're saying, see, the things that they're interested in, you can bring those in there. And then also, we talked about this in the last panel. If there is an instance where, they're bringing up a sensitive topic, you can always, use the bridge technique, right? You can say, answer the question directly and then bridge it into something more that you want to talk about, so that person doesn't focus on the negative or the soft or the whatever type of, topic that you guys are talking about. So,
yeah, that's a great point. The next one is create a list of talking points. So know what you're going to talk about beforehand. This is something that you've already pitched to this reporter or this podcast or person or whoever you're talking to. So it should be pretty known, but this just helps you kind of stay focused on during the conversation. And I know I can go off into a tangent, and I know a lot of people who, like, once you get them going, they go wherever they want to go.
Yeah. And I say to clients when we're doing our media training, like, I know that, every opportunity is to get out. You want to get out as much information as possible, but literally keep it at 3 things, 3 speaking points. Okay. And so you'll, like to Ranjani's point, you'll always be focused. You'll always be on task, because when you start going off on a tangent on one thing, the interview's over before you know it. You didn't even touch on the other 2 important things.
Right.
Or the other things that you wanted to. So really just kind of narrowing down, boom, boom, boom. Maybe you want to talk about your differentiators. Okay. Maybe you want to talk about, things that you have coming up, like a forecast of things that you're going to be introducing in the next year, whatever it is. Just keep those 3 things in mind and try to find a way to kind of bring the conversation back there. When you start to feel it drifting, like, the person that's interviewing you is interviewing you, but you're kind of, again, in control of the interview, right? You're steering the conversation, because a lot of times too, if it's not a person asking you questions that they've already sent you. You will say one thing and they will, as a journalist, they will always have a question or a backup, something to ask you about that thing you said. So it can get very easy to get off track.
Yeah. And to that point, I would always say, like, some of the people who are the best interviewees, like clients that we've had that have done really great interviews, they are not afraid to come back and say what they want to say at the end. Like, right before the interview finishes, like, oh, hey, no, I would like to add this one more point. It's okay to do that. That's your interview, that they are spending time with you on the phone. You got them. You don't know when you're going to get them again. Do it. Interject. That's okay. I mean, just do it in a nice way. But like, I think it's always okay to add those extra things. If you forgot, oh, I forgot to tell you this.
Right.
Don't be afraid of doing that.
Like, this is important, but you want to know what's really important?
Yeah.
Whatever is really important, just lead right into that and make sure that, again, to Ranjini's point, at the end of the conversation, they literally always ask you, is there anything else you like to add? So if you don't feel...
Well, I don't know if they always ask you that. I beg to differ. Like, I think a lot of times they do, but sometimes they just, like, if they want to shut down the interview, they'll just get out of there.
They're like,
okay,
out of here. So if in the case where you may not have gotten some of your key messages and you do get the opportunity at the end where they say, is there anything you want to add? And you might not have felt comfortable interjecting earlier, that would be the opportunity to do that, is what I say.
Yeah, and don't be like, oh no, there's nothing. Like, it's like it's like best practice in an interview when you're interviewing for a job. Like, always have a question.
Always have, and honestly, if it's just literally, reiterating your key messages and
or visit our website, or whatever.
Check out, we have a white book and whatever.
Yeah.
Hey, just make sure you're using that opportunity and that time wisely.
Absolutely. And then what's your call to action? What do you want them to do? Where do you want them to go? Just make sure you have that in mind and plug that. I mean, having an interview is a time to plug that. The call to action is just writing it. You can even ask. I've had people ask. I always feel uncomfortable, but I think it's okay. Hey, when are you planning on publishing this article? Or when is this podcast coming out? So that could be a call to action for you to ask the interviewer. I always get those confused on, like, what is that next step, right? And then if it's something that where you're on a podcast and they're, closing out the interview, say, oh yeah, you can visit my website at thesilvertelegram.com, or I have this great white paper about how to start your thought leadership on thesilvertelegram.com. Download it for free. Like, you can give that little extra call to action. We don't have a white paper up there right now, but we do have a white paper so you guys can contact.
Right. Or, even if you say, for instance, you want to get more traction on your LinkedIn, like, connect with me on LinkedIn. That's a great thing for business.
Right.
CEOs, or we have a YouTube page. Check out our YouTube page. Like, those are all good general things that you can say, because you're not only, you're getting exposure there, but you're going to see it. Once they watch the interview, they'll see, your followers, your views, those type of things will start to increase too. So.
Okay. So we are coming up. We need to shut this down. So let's following up with useful information. I just talked to a bunch of media, a couple of media people this morning and in our media panel, and they say this, they reiterate this. I believe this. Whenever you follow up, always have some additional useful info. You can follow up and say, hey, when will this publish? Also, here's a link to my press kit, or whatever the case may be. Here's some extra information that will help supplement your story, the podcast, the interview, whatever the case is. So always follow up. I tell everybody at Silver Telegram this, always follow up with some kind of value, because then they're going to know, again, you're a resource. You're someone they can go to, make sure you thank them. A simple appreciation is also nice.
Exactly.
All right. I don't think we have time for questions. I think we've covered, we went pretty in depth in everything. I think this is a really great primer on thought leadership. I'm sure other questions will come up. I think it's just, yeah. I had a, yeah.
You can reach out to us on our social media.
Absolutely. If you have a question, please, the call to action here is reach out to us. You can directly email me, Ranjini at the Silver Telegram. You can hit Jasmine at the Silver Telegram. We are here to answer your questions. And obviously we are happy to give out advice and information. And then if you want this presentation, I think this is going to be available on demand after pretty quickly. So you should be able to access it quickly. But if you want the presentation, we're happy to send it to you as well.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks, Jasmine. Talk to you soon.
Bye.